Here we go. Welcome, everyone. My name is Emma Myers. I'm the program manager here at REEF. We're going to talk today about applying for your work permit, specifically focusing on ASAP and CASA membership and how that affects your work permit application process. To get started, we're going to cover how to apply for your work permit, the distinction between being an ASAP or CASA member when you apply for your work permit versus not, what to do after you've submitted your work permit application, and what to do if you've been waiting for a decision for a lengthy period of time. And we're going to leave about 30 minutes for your questions so we can kind of answer any questions you all have. Two things to note before we get started. First, REEF is not part of either of these organizations, ASAP or CASA. If you have a question about your membership to one of those organizations, you can reach out to them directly. Both organizations have websites with membership pages where it's very clear how to reach out to them. The other thing I'll note is that I and those of us on the call today from REEF are not immigration attorneys. Some of the questions you have might require kind of legal guidance. If that's the case, I'll ask you to email me and I'll connect you with a member of our legal team to advise further. So having covered that, I want to kind of get a feel for the room. How many people here are ASAP and CASA members? Maybe everyone can just indicate in the chat if that applies to you.
I'm not a member, but I tried to apply last Friday.
Got it.
And I did not get any response from them.
Cool. Cool. We can talk about that. My second question is, how many people have already applied for their work permit? That's either your initial work permit or a renewal, as opposed to you haven't applied yet. You're just beginning the process. So I see Marty, it looks like you've applied.
Yes, I did. I applied on the 27th March 27th.
Great.
I received the letter saying that they received the application. And I received two letters. The one said that they received the application and the second one said that there was in process.
Okay. We'll get into some of these details. So we have a good spread in the room. I'm going to talk in our virtual room. I'm going to talk generally about the initial application and the renewal, what to do if you're an ASAP or CASA member, what to do if you're not an ASAP and CASA member, so that we really cover the breadth of information that's relevant to everyone here. And then we can drill in on some of these specific situations in your questions. So first things first, how to apply for your work permit. As many of you will already know, you're going to complete your form I-765. That form is always available at this link that I've indicated here. And it's really important to find the form by going through this link because USIS will regularly update their forms. And if you submit an application using an old version of the form, it'll automatically be denied. And so by grabbing the form from this URL, you're going to always make sure that you have the most up-to-date form. Then you'll begin collecting your supporting documents. And I'm going to talk in a next slide about exactly what those documents are. You'll prepare your cover letter. When I review applications, this is the piece of feedback I most often give is that people won't include a cover letter. And a cover letter is really about making it easy for the person at USIS who's reading your application to understand what they're looking at very quickly, so there aren't any confusions with your application. The cover letter will say who you are. Is this an initial work permit application? Is it a renewal? Are you a member of ASAP, CASA, or not? If you're including any fees with the application, it'll say what those fees are and how you're paying for them, whether it's that you've included a check, you've included a form to authorize USIS to charge your bank account the amount. And then finally, in the cover letter, you're going to list all of your supporting documents in the order that you've attached them to your form I-765. So the cover letter is a really critical piece of the application in terms of making it very clear and understandable. We have a template cover letter that we are happy to share. If you're at a stage where you're preparing a cover letter for your work permit application, you can reach out to me by email if you'd like to see that template. And when you're ready to submit your application, REEF can review it just to make sure that you've checked all the right boxes and everything on the form and that everything's in order. to avoid having USIS send an application back just because of a small error, like having missed a question. Again, if you're at that stage in the process and you'd like Reef to help with that, go ahead and send me an email and I can connect you with one of our navigators. There are a few things to consider when you're applying for your work permit, and a big one is whether to request a fee waiver. This is more relevant on work permit renewal applications, for which right now there's a $495 fee, the $410 application fee, and then the $95 or the $85 biometrics fee. For the initial work permit application, if you're an ASAP or CASA member, it's free. And if you're not, it's $85. So the fee waiver request is a little less significant. Essentially what a fee waiver request is you're sending your application to USIS and you're saying, I can't afford to pay the fee for this application. Will you guys please make an exemption for me so I don't have to pay this fee? And it's a form you fill out, form 912, I believe, and it's very systematic. You have to meet one of the 3 criteria, and they are that you're 150% below the federal poverty guidelines. That's going to, it's a different number depending on where you live and how many people you have in your family, so that you'll have to Google that to see which one applies to you. And we can always help with that. So you're either 150% below the federal poverty guideline, you're already receiving an income-based benefit. This means that you're receiving a government benefit that's based on your income or how much money you make. Notably and relevant this year, unemployment insurance is an income-based benefit. So if you're receiving unemployment insurance, you're already work authorized, you're applying for a renewal, you're receiving unemployment insurance, you can go ahead and submit a request for a fee waiver. The third criteria is a little more flexible. You can show that you have financial hardship. An example of this would be like if you have very extreme medical bills for some reason this year that are impacting your financial well-being, that might be an instance of financial hardship. Or if as a result of the pandemic, you were evicted from your apartment and you need to find a new apartment and you had to incur moving expenses, that would be financial hardship. The key here is that you have to be able to demonstrate the financial hardship. So simply saying, this has been a hard year for me, I lost my job, that wouldn't meet the criteria. The other thing to note here as well, technically you only need one of these 3 criterias to qualify for a fee waiver. In the last few years, we've observed that most of the successful fee waiver requests have actually had 2 of these criteria. And so if you meet more than one of these criteria, it's good to go ahead and provide all the evidence for all the criteria that you can to increase the chances that your fee waiver request is going to be approved. The second thing to consider when you're thinking about a fee waiver request is the timing of your renewal. And to submit a fee waiver request, you're going to attach it to your completed work permit application, work permit renewal application in most cases. And you're going to send it to USIS, but you're not going to include the payment. And they'll review the application and your fee waiver request. And USIS will either say, okay, this looks good, we're gonna waive the fee and we'll process this, and they'll send you a receipt for your work permit application. Or they're gonna look at your fee waiver request and say, you don't meet our criteria, and they deny you the request. And they send the whole application back to you. You have to then include payment and send it all back to them one more time. So if you're coming up on the expiration date for your current work permit, you may not have the time to go through this process without risking having a gap in work authorization. So that's one thing to consider. How to make that decision is going to depend on a case-to-case basis. So that's a bit on the fee waiver request. You can always if this is something you're considering when you're going through your application process, you can reach out to us and we can talk about it in more detail. And the second bullet point, submitting a new renewal application, I've already sort of hinted at. You can submit your renewal application 180 days before your current work permit expires. We recommend that you do it as soon as you can, because As a result of COVID, USIS has announced that they're experiencing delays in processing receipts for work permits across across most of their service centers, including the one in Texas where asylum seeker work permits are being sent. So it takes about 6 to 8 weeks right now for them to issue a receipt. This is really important when we talk about renewal applications, because your receipt is going to be your proof of work authorization after your current work permit expires. So your current work permit, 180 days before your current work permit expires, you're going to apply for a renewal, and you're going to get a receipt in the mail. About a month later is what USIS is estimating, and you're going to hold on to that receipt. And if you don't get your renewal card before your current card expires, then that receipt effectively becomes your work permit, and you can use it to stay work authorized while you wait for USIS to issue your renewal. And so it's important to give yourself enough time when you're applying for your renewal that you receive your receipt before your current work permit expires, to avoid having a gap in your work authorization. I see a few questions popping up in the chat, which we'll talk about when we get to kind of a question period in a few minutes. What documents do you need to submit your work permit application? Here's a list. If you are applying just for yourself, this is all you'll include. If your application is for yourself and for a derivative, a family member, then you'll include all of these documents for yourself, and then all of these documents for each derivative that's also on your application. You'll see in several places here I've indicated that you're providing a copy of these. In no instance should you be providing the original version of any of these documents. It's always going to be a copy. If you're an ASAP or CASA member, your membership card is going to be the second thing you put on your application. And it's important that it's right there and it's visible to the USIS officer who's processing your application, because that membership means your application is going to be handled differently from all the other applications. So you want to make it really clear that you're a member of one of those organizations in order to get the benefits, which I'll talk about on a later slide. The last bullet point I also want to draw everyone's attention to, you'll need to include any evidence of arrests and convictions. If this is something that applies to you, we have kind of a guide on our website with more details about exactly what evidence you need to be providing. If you're someone who has an arrest or conviction, we recommend speaking with an attorney, either a private attorney you might be working with, a pro bono attorney, before you submit your application. If you're going through the process without an attorney, you can also reach out to Reef and we can connect you with a member of our legal team for a legal consultation. And the reason being is that it's just important that all of this is captured correctly on the work permit application, so that it doesn't affect your work permit application, but also so that it matches what's on your I-589 form, because those two forms USIS may reference them against each other. So if there's an arrest listed on your I-589 form that's not listed on your I-765 form, that could create delays for USIS in processing your application. The last thing I'll note is that many people's asylum claims are in fact based on arbitrary arrest or detention. So many of you back home may have arrests that you need to document, and that's absolutely fine. It's not going to jeopardize any aspect of your application, of your work permit application. It's widely recognized that many people who are applying for asylum will have arrests in their record. And one last thing I'll note is that we kind of have a more extensive list of kind of all of this evidence on our website and in a series of resources that we keep offline. So if this information would be helpful, reach out to me by email and I can provide some of those resources. So to the big question, applying for a work permit as an ASAP or CASA member versus not being an ASAP or CASA member. And before I get into the distinctions, I first want to explain why this distinction even exists in the first place. In 2019, the Trump administration made a new rule that said Instead of waiting 150 days after your asylum application, asylum seekers now need to wait 365 days to become eligible for a work permit. The rule also said that whereas previously USIS had been required to process a work permit application within 30 days of receiving it, now there's no processing requirement. So you have to wait a year to apply for your work permit, and USIS has no obligation to process your work permit within any scope of time. Immediately, several organizations, including ASAP and CASA, got together and they sued the government over this rule. So they effectively took the government to court and said this rule, in this case, they said the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees USIS, they said the Department of Homeland Security doesn't have the authority to do what they're doing in this rule. The judge who's hearing the case, looking at the initial evidence, decided to grant an injunction. And this means that the judge temporarily and partially blocked the rule from going into effect because the rule is very harmful. And looking at the evidence, it seems like ASAP and CASA may have a case against the government. And so while the judge is hearing the case, the rule does not apply specifically to ASAP and CASA members, the people who brought the case to the judge. So they're protected from that new rule. The rule still applies to the rest of asylum seekers who are not ASAP or CASA members. And that's why we have this distinction right now between the work permit application process if you're a member of one of these organizations versus the work permit application process if you're not a member of one of these organizations. This table in front of us now kind of breaks that down. If you're a member of ASAP and CASA, you can apply for your work permit 150 days after your asylum receipt date. If you're not a member of one of those organizations, you're only eligible to apply for your work permit application 365 days after your asylum receipt date. The second distinction is for ASAP and CASA members, there's no cost for the initial application, work permit application. The biometrics fee is waived for ASAP and CASA members. If you're not a member of ASAP or CASA, you must pay the $85 biometric fee on your initial application. For the renewal application, the costs are the same. Whether you're an ASAP or not an ASAP or CASA, you're going to pay $295 for your renewal unless you're approved for a fee waiver, which is that process we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So I'll often get people who, people will ask us, they're applying for their renewal. And since the number of days on their asylum clock doesn't really matter anymore, they'll say, well, is it really important that I become a member of one of these organizations? And our answer is always yes. And it's because of this last distinction. ASAP and CASA members are entitled to have their work permit application processed within 30 days of the receipt date at USIS. It can take longer. We're seeing it take longer in a lot of cases. But if it does, and you're an ASAP and CASA member, you have more courses of action you can take because of this court case. If you're not a member of ASAP or CASA, there's no processing requirement for USIS on your application. So if you apply for a renewal and the fees are the same regardless of whether you're a member of the organizations or not, but USIS has no obligation to process your application, we're seeing it take 5-6 months for people to receive a response. USIS on their website, they publish kind of an estimated processing time for each of the forms at each of the service centers. The work permit application form at the Texas Service Center, which is where asylum seekers forms are being sent. Right now, it's about 1.5 to 6 months is how long it takes USIS to respond to a work permit application. And I suspect that this 1.5 number includes people who are ASAP and CASA members. So that 1.5 is captured by the people who are protected by this court case. If you're not, you're really probably looking at a minimum. It's going to take 3 months, and you should really expect it to take 5 or 6 months to receive a response. We've talked about most everything on this slide, but just to reiterate, this is the reason there's a distinction right now between the work permit application process, if you're a member of one of these organizations versus not a member, is because of this court case that's ongoing. And there's this temporary protection for members of these organizations because those are the organizations that are involved in the court case. There's no timeline for when the case is going to be decided. We're keeping our eye on it, and we'll post on our website as soon as that happens. When the case is decided, there are two things that could happen. Either the judge could decide the Department of Homeland Security did not have the authority to do this, so we're going to overturn this rule, and the rule is not going to exist anymore. And then we would return to the previous rule, which is essentially what ASAP and CASA members are currently, what currently applies to them. So for everyone, it would go back to 150 days, 30-day processing requirement. Or alternatively, the judge could say, you know, DHS had the authority to do this. We're gonna leave the rule on the books. The rule is going to stay in effect. If that happened, then the injunction that protects ASAP and CASA members would go away, and the 365-day rule would apply to everyone again. So it would kind of be a step backwards for everyone. Again, no timeline on when that's going to happen. It's just kind of a waiting game right now. And then finally, it is so important to attach your CASA and ASAP membership card as the first piece of supporting evidence in the package that's going to make up your work permit application. And to also indicate very clearly on your cover letter, my name is Emma, I am an asylum seeker, I am applying for my work permit, I am a member of this organization, so that the person at USIS who's processing the application can very quickly reference, okay, this person's going to go in our ASAP and CASA stack. And those work permits are going to be handled differently from the work permits for people who aren't members. What to do after you submit your application? It's critical that you include tracking when you ship your application, so that you know when your application arrived at the USIS facility. But it's also important to note that the tracking receipt date, the date that your tracking shows your package arrived at the facility, is not your official work permit application receipt date. That's the date that's going to be listed on your receipt. Essentially, when an application arrives at these processing facilities, it kind of goes into a stack, and there's a person whose job it is to kind of receive them, look at them, and be like, okay, check, we received this one. And there's a delay right now between when applications arrive at the facility and when they're marked by USIS as having been arrived, and that's when their processing starts. We're going by the date, USIS's receipt date that they're listing on the receipt. That's the one that when we say receipt date, that's what we mean. And right now, USIS is indicating that there's a lag of about 6 to 8 weeks between when things arrive and when they begin being processed. The 30-day processing requirement starts when USIS issues that receipt. Often people will reach out and say, I've been waiting a really long time for my work permit application decision. And as we're speaking to them, it'll become clear that they haven't even received a receipt yet. Receiving that receipt is the first step. It's critical to do because that's kind of when these clocks, these timelines begin. If you haven't received a receipt and it's been, I'd say at about 2 to 3 weeks, if you haven't received a receipt, you can call USIS's service center. It's an automated phone system that's going to pick up your call. We'll talk about that more on a next slide. And it can be a little intimidating. We have a couple different scripts that we can give depending on the reason you're calling, that make it easiest to navigate the automated portion of the call to get to a live representative who can answer your questions. It's a little easier to speak with them. So if you're ever reaching out to USIS by phone and want some tips on how to do that, please email us. The other big question we get is, what should I do if I've already submitted my work permit application? Now I'm waiting and waiting. And so now I become an ASAP or CASA member. Do I get the benefits, even though I applied for my ASAP and CASA membership after I already applied for my work permit? And unfortunately, the answer is no. Your ASAP or CASA membership is relevant let me rephrase. The day you submit your work permit application, whether you were an ASAP or CASA member on that date, that's what's going to determine whether you experience the benefit. So becoming an ASAP or CASA member after you've already applied, the benefits aren't applied retroactively. In some cases, you may want to submit a new work permit application once you become an ASAP or CASA member, but that's really going to be on a case-by-case basis and should be a decision that's made in collaboration with an attorney. Whether it's your attorney that you've been working with, or if you're going through the application process without an attorney, you can reach out to Reef, and one of our legal team can speak to you on this point. So what to do if you've been waiting for a decision for a long time? The answer is really going to depend on whether you're a member of one of these organizations or not. If you're a member of one of these organizations, 25 days after your receipt date, you'll call USIS to create a service request number. And again, it's an automated phone system. It's hard to get through to a representative as opposed to speaking to the robot on the phone. We have a very specific script for how to create a service request number in this specific circumstance. So if this applies to you, reach out to us by email. 8 days after you create the service request date. So that's when you speak to somebody on the phone at USIS, you say, there's a problem with my application. They say, okay, we're going to look into it. And they create a service request for you. That's kind of a confirmation that they're looking into it. 8 days after that, you'll email the Rosario class action. And this is essentially kind of the legal representation for the organizations that are suing the government over these rules. And by emailing the Rosario class action, you essentially elevate your problem to the people directly involved in this court case. You're saying the government's not fulfilling its obligation right now. And the Rosario class action team can step in and advocate on your behalf. Two things to note. First is that usually if somebody is an ASAP or CASA member, they've been waiting 25 days and they create a service request number, the next 8 days isn't relevant because their application will get approved very quickly. It's like you give a knock to USIS and you say, hey, remember, you got to do mine in 30 days. And they usually do it because they're trying to meet this obligation. So it's very rare that people have to, in our experience, that our members have had to elevate this to the class action team. The other thing to note is that if you email the class action team for any reason other than this, or if you email them and you don't have a service request number yet, they're just going to ignore that email. It's very important to go through these steps very systematically because they're receiving a ton of requests right now. So they're just going to ignore anything that's not relevant. What to do if you've been waiting and you're not an ASAP and CASA member? Unfortunately, the answer here is that it really is just a waiting game. As I said, the processing time right now is 1.5 to 6 months. If you're not an ASAP or CASA member, I'd say that's more 3 to 6 months. You can keep checking for updates on the processing times at the links at the link that I've provided here. I would also note that you can still call USIS and you can say, I've been waiting for my application. Do you have any update? And sometimes calling can help kind of jolt things along. So don't think just because you're not a member of these organizations that you don't have recourse. You can call. It's just that you don't have the same legal protections that members of this organization currently have because of this ongoing court case. I'm going to run through 3 of the most frequently asked questions we get, and then I'm going to turn to your questions. And I see quite a few of them coming into the chat right now. The first question is, if I'm granted asylum before I get a work permit, what happens? When you're granted asylum, you're also automatically granted work authorization. By becoming an asylee, you become work authorized. Your asylum grant letter has an I-94 on it that's going to indicate that you're work authorized. And right away, from the moment you receive that letter, you can use that I-94 as proof of work authorization for a job. You should also get a work permit in the mail automatically, but that may take a few weeks. So you can use your asylum grant letter in the interim. And this comes up most often with recent applicants where you're gonna submit your application. You'll probably be called for your asylum interview before you become eligible to apply for a work permit. So it's people who are applying right now for whom this question applies most often. The second question is, how do I explain my work authorization to potential employers? We get this question a ton. And the answer is that, often you all as job applicants, especially in professional settings, are going to have to do a little bit of educating around what work authorization means in the context of asylum. Sometimes companies will assume that you may need sponsorship or something like that, and that may be a deterrent for them to hire you because it's an expense for the company. And it's really critical to make sure companies know that that's not the case for you. Your work authorization is based on your asylum application. They don't need to do anything. It's not going to cost them anything. It's also important to note, and sometimes requires a little bit of educating as well, employers, that your receipt is evidence of work authorization. If you have a gap between your kind of expired work permit and you haven't received your new one, your receipt is your work permit. The final question is, how do I get a social security card? When you are applying for your initial work permit or work permit application, you will want to check, there's a question on the form. It's part 2, question 14. It says, do you want the Social Security Administration to issue you a Social Security card? And you're going to check yes there. And that means that you're automatically also applying for a Social Security card. If you do not check yes to that question, you'll get your work permit, but you're going to have to apply separately for your Social Security card through the Social Security Administration. So by checking yes, you're just cutting one step out of the process. When you're approved for your work permit, if you checked yes to this question, you're also going to be approved for your Social Security number and card. But note that your work permit and your Social Security card are going to come in separate envelopes. Your work permit's going to come first from USIS, and then it takes a couple weeks, really up even to a month, for the Social Security Administration to send your Social Security card. The Social Security Administration is a totally different agency. So there's a little bit of a gap between when those two things happen. If you're granted asylum before you receive your work permit, so this is relevant for people who are applying for asylum right now, where you're getting called for your interview first. It's very, very possible that you could receive your asylum decision before you ever become eligible to apply for work permit. If that's the case, unfortunately, you need to apply for your Social Security card separately through the Social Security Administration. And there are lots of organizations in New York City that help with this, including IRC, Catholic Charities. If this applies to you, let us know and we can refer you to the right organizations to help with these next steps. So with that, let's turn to questions from the group. I know a couple have come into the chat. But I would encourage everyone to speak up and answer any questions that you posed.
Oh, I actually can speak up.
Who was that?
Oh, it was me, Katerina.
Oh, hi, Katerina. What's your question?
Hi, I have a few questions. So for the renewal, we have to pay the biometrics fee, and I can avoid paying this fee becoming the member of ASAP, right? But actually, if I pay the fee or it's waived for the renewal, do I still have to go for the biometrics again?
Your biometrics fee is waived for your initial application, not for the renewal.
Yeah, but I don't have to go and do fingerprints again.
It's gonna depend on when you last did fingerprints.
Like 2 years ago. It's my second renewal.
Yeah, it'll depend. And they'll let you know that if you need to go again, they'll issue a new appointment notice for that. There's a period of time, which I don't know exactly off the top of my head, in between biometrics, but it's a couple years where if that much time has elapsed, you're going to have to go to get them again.
Oh, I see. So, okay, got it. But usually they send the biometrics appointments like a month in advance. Like how do I know when exactly I should do that?
Until you receive that receipt notice or that appointment notice, it's not, you shouldn't worry about it. They'll send it as soon as they need that information.
Got it. But I would allow like maybe a month or at least 3 weeks, because I'm afraid if that will, like, I'm not sure like how much, like, is it going to be like right away or like a month or?
Usually they send, you mean between when you receive the notice and when your appointment date would be?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, usually it's kind of 2 to 3 weeks.
got it. Not bad. That's good.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Also,
not like you're gonna get it and it's gonna be like tomorrow. You have to
oh
run.
yeah, thank you. So if you as ASAP member, you mentioned it will not affect the case.
Say that one more time.
If you are an ASAP member, that's not going to affect your case, your asylum case.
Your asylum case? No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay,
Yeah.
got
Don't
it.
be dissuaded from becoming a member of this organization. It won't impact your asylum application.
Okay. Also, I know that for the application packet, for the work permit packet, you have to put your papers in a specific order. Is that correct?
Yeah, the order that I listed on the slide, it's also available on our website. I'll send it around to everyone who participated in this group. The order that I suggested is the one I recommend doing it in.
Mhm.
In some
Because
cases,
I didn't see, because if you renew, you have to put the copies of your previous work permit. So I didn't see you put it in there.
oh yes, no, that should be in there as well in the case of a renewal. And also on the document that has specific checklists in the case of an initial versus a renewal. Whatever order you put them in, even if it's not the order we recommend, what's most important is that your cover letter lists them in the same order that they appear in your application.
So the cover letter comes first. For example, when I put everything in an envelope, the cover letter comes first.
Exactly. It's kind of like the table of contents.
Yeah. Okay. And also I know there's a form, what's it called? Something like R something that will let you to receive like updates via phone or email.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the form. Let me reference the exact.
It's like a 1-pager form.
Yeah, it's the form G1145, G1145. And it allows e-notifications. Yes, and you can submit that as well.
So where should I put it? Like at front, in the front, or?
Yeah, that can go in the front after your cover letter. I'll send around. We have a kind of more extensive document of the specific checklist for each, whether you're individual or you have derivatives, whether it's an initial work permit or a renewal, that includes where to put the form G1195.
Okay. And the last question I have about the photos. So we need 2 passport photos. How do I attach those photos? Do I use like a clip or?
Yeah, everything, you're going to want everything to be attached as a clip so that it can be pulled apart as needed.
Okay, and pictures go to the oh my God, to the work application form, right? It's like the top right corner, both of them.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I see a couple more questions coming in. I see one from you, Ruslan.
Hello, this is Marty speaking. I have a question. Is it possible that your employer can sponsor you for a green card?
Employers can sponsor. There are various different ways employers can sponsor, different types of work authorization. It's going to depend on the employer. It's typically something that larger companies do as opposed to smaller companies. So like larger companies with global presences, with big HR departments. The other thing to know is that it can be a costly process for an employer to take it on. So that's another reason that it tends to be larger organizations and companies that will provide sponsorship.
Okay, because I remember I asked last 2 years, I asked my employer and they say that I have to have a bachelor degree.
Yeah, exactly. And it's employers make their own decisions about when to sponsor someone versus not. They're essentially, what the employer is doing is making an investment in you as an employee to get you either work authorized or permanent status in the United States. And so they can set whatever criteria they want in deciding, whether they want to take on that responsibility with an employee. So for example, some might, for some, it might be based on your qualifications. For some, it might be based on how long you've worked at the organization. It's going to be different for every employer.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
J'ai une question, mais c'est en français. I have a question.
Sure. Maria, do you want to translate?
Allez-y et je vais traduire pour vous.
Bonjour, moi c'est Wilson. J'ai déjà mon permis de travail il y a 3 semaines, mais je voulais savoir qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire pour avoir les sécurités sociales.
Ok, je vais poser la question. Wilson has received his work permit 3 weeks ago, but he wants to know what he should do now to apply for his social security.
It's going to depend on whether you filled out that question on the work permit application form.
Alors, let me ask him. Est-ce que vous avez, quand vous avez demandé, vous avez appliqué pour votre demande de travail, votre work permit, est-ce que vous avez coché, il y a une demande on vous demande, est-ce que vous voulez appliquer pour votre carte de sécurité sociale?
Bon, je ne sais pas, c'est mon avocat qui a appliqué cela, mais je ne sais pas s'il a coché.
C'est qui ça, c'est votre avocat?
Oui, c'est mon avocat.
He's not sure, Emma, because he says it's his lawyer who did, so he's not sure if his lawyer did for him.
Yeah, you're going to want to check there first. If your lawyer did check that box, then you'll get your social security card any day now. It takes like 3 to 5 weeks for it to come. There are some delays right now because of COVID at the Social Security Administration and with the post office. So it could still be coming. If your attorney didn't check that box, you're going to have to apply for your Social Security separately through the Social Security Administration. And you can do that on their website.
Ok, alors elle a dit il y a 2 scénarios. Soit d'abord vous devriez demander vous devriez vérifier avec votre avocat pour lui demander si effectivement il a fait la demande sur le formulaire. Et donc, s'il a fait la demande, ça devrait normalement arriver très bientôt. Sinon, vous allez faire vous-même la demande de la carte de sécurité sociale sur le website de Social Security. Et puis sinon, il faudra envoyer un email à peu près après, plus particulier à Emma et qui peut vous expliquer quand vous attendez quelques jours.
Ok, je peux avoir le website?
Do you have the website?
Let me try to pull it up. There's the information on how to apply.
Vous le voyez, Wilson? Elle a mis sur le chat le site.
Non, je ne vois pas.
Ah ben, c'est écrit, vous voyez, regardez dans le chat.
I can also send it around in the email to everyone who participated. So you'll have it there.
De toute façon, elle enverra après, à la fin elle vous enverra sur le email, sur votre email.
Ah, ok. Merci beaucoup.
You're welcome. I see Ruslan's question in the chat. It is, how long does it take to get ASAP or CASA membership? First, I would CASA is a regional organization specific to Pennsylvania and Maryland and one other state that's escaping me. And there's a fee to apply for CASA membership. So I recommend becoming a member of ASAP, which is free and applies to all asylum seekers. In the past, it's taken about 2 weeks for people to be approved. However, ASAP is receiving just record numbers of applications as a result of this court case and the protection that its members are receiving. So sometimes there may be delays. I'm scanning their website right now because for a period they had been publishing up until which date they've processed applications through so that you know if they've gone into your application yet. I'm not seeing that anymore just on a quick scan, but I will, I'll take a deeper dive and send around to everyone who participated. And I'm going to put in the chat as well the membership page for ASAP. It's an easy application. It's free. I recommend just taking the time to sit down and get it out of the way.
I have another question if nobody has more questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
It might be not relevant, but I'm getting back to the question that was asked before about the green card for the employer. So I'm quite confused here because we're speaking about asylum seekers. Is it possible for an asylum seeker to get the employment-based adjustments or not?
Yeah, it's going to depend on your case. It's going to depend on what visa you use to enter the country, on the employer. Right. If you're,
so
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to, I think I'm going to email you to ask for, as you suggest before, we can email you and ask for the legal help maybe to get connected.
Yeah, I would recommend that. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Really going to depend on the specifics of your entry status and an employer.
Thank you.
But generally, yes, asylum seekers can get adjustments of status. The question is how it's going to impact your asylum case, and it's going to look different for everyone. So that's totally a legal question that you need to speak with a lawyer about. Any final questions? Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Like I said, I'll send around a lot of this information to everyone who registered that we've discussed. And the recording of this presentation will be up on our YouTube this afternoon, so you can always go back and reference this information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you all very much. It was really helpful.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the more information. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.